as a Christian, I became a Christian kind of through apologetics and then philosophy. And so I've always had a rational emphasis in my Christian faith. I've always been an artist, and so I've had almost a bipolar or schizophrenic, a beautiful mind sort of struggle in me between the arts in my artistic life, which I lived one way, but then in my faith, I started realizing my whole faith had been developed through apologetics and rational argumentation and philosophy, which is not bad. Of course, the Bible is very rational, God is the Logos, etc., and there's reasoning in the Bible. But what I realized was that over the years, I had compartmentalized my life, and in the sense that my faith was very rationalistic. And so I would stress systematic theology, I would stress apologetics, rational argumentation, understanding doctrine, all these things which are important elements, but I realized that I had neglected the imagination side of Scripture. I had relegated that to, it's acceptable, because of course I was an artist, right? But I had started to see imagination, the arts, the visual, drama, all these things that are part of arts as secondary, as illustrations of the rational doctrine, as sort of a support, second-class status in terms of theology. Because, of course, we all know, as good evangelicals, that, theological discourse and systematic theology, that's where you really get it down. And then I started realizing how much my Christianity had been affected by modernism. And realizing modernism, because of the Enlightenment, scientific and science and reason became the deities in a modern culture. And as Christians, of course, we spurn those deities. But I think I was heavily influenced by that to realize that systematic theology is the scientific method applied to understanding God. Again, it's not inherently bad, but it creates a prejudice, a bias in your understanding of God that can blind you to God's fullness of who He is. And I become so involved in that, again, through philosophy and apologetics, that I lost that imaginative connection. And so Word Pictures was expressing my journey of rediscovery of the imagination, which is not too unlike what C.S. Lewis went through. Mm-hmm. And I'm not likening myself to him, but when I read his little story about what he went through, I'm like, wow, I didn't know. So C.S. Lewis always comes up with, whenever I learn some truth in my life, I discover C.S. Lewis said something about it already, And and I know he's a hero here too. So anyway, I put that actually in the book, and it was this. When Lewis, there was a change in his life where he was heavily rational and logical and emphasized debating and all that. But then he had that debate with Anscombe, and it wasn't. And then he sort of switched and focused more on his fictional writing, and that's when Narnia came out. And it wasn't that he was running away from rationality; it's that he realized that the imagination can come into contact with truth in a way that rationality cannot. And so they're both needed, both necessary. And I had that same experience in my own life, only it wasn't just from this sort of Christian worldview perspective. It's in the Bible. And so I was looking in the Bible and discovering, wow, yeah, God uses rationality, but you realize about 20-30% of the Bible is propositional truth. But about 70 to 80% is image, story, poetry, parable. God actually, it's not just that imagination is acceptable, it's biblically acceptable. It's that it's one of the dominant means through which God communicates who He is. And so rather than saying, therefore imagination is, like the postmodern would say, therefore it's all imagination, rationality is a Greek construct, and cast it aside in irrationality. No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that if in our theology we have, or if in our philosophy we have an epistemology, an ontology, and an ethics, but we don't have an aesthetics, we're not fully understanding God, because beauty is a key part of how God communicates who he is to us. And it's in the scriptures. So word pictures is sort of a little bit of my journey and a little bit of my biblical exegesis for you, for those who are in the arts or in media, to show you how much God values what you're doing in and of itself, and how much that should be applied to our faith, not just my artistic life, but then I've got my theology, and then I've got my Christian faith, which is somehow different. They're both equally ultimate in God's eyes, and I root it in the incarnation. If in the incarnation Christ is the Word made flesh, and so consequently, if you overemphasize rationality, you'll have a scientific, it's like dissecting a frog. You'll be able to figure out the parts, but you've killed the frog, folks. The essence of the frog is the life. So you really are not fully understanding the frog. By the same token, if you find yourself awash in artistic, imaginative creativity, you can also come to know God. You can miss his rational side. But in the incarnation, they're both equally ultimate. And so in our understanding of God, we should have an equal ultimacy of how we approach God through word, through reason, through rationality, but also through imagination, through beauty. And that's sort of the point of the book, the argument that I make. And I hope that will help people to be balanced in their faith rather than just swinging from one extreme to another.